move beyond that and begin to look at ourselves and look at our system holistically.
You can see that I'm just about to leap up in the air here, but I'll control myself here, contain myself. I'm excited about everything that you've said, Scott, everything that you've said, Kim. And as you very well know, this whole thing excites me. At the end of the day, my desire is to see hierarchy diminished in our schools so that our children aren't ultimately learning to bully in a culture that is so hierarchical and less informed about the kind of children that are there. Our systems need to be informed. Our teachers need to be informed because they really do want to do well and we want to set them up for success. So we want to diminish the whole culture of bullying because we really know that children have to learn that from somewhere. And if they're learning it at home, and if they're learning it at school, then we can't expect them to operate any differently than what we're seeing. Our parents, we so desperately need them to come on board. I don't know about you, Kim, but I did not grow up in a household where if my mother told me to wash the dishes, I could say we need to get some lattes and sit around the table and have an intellectual dialogue.
No, I didn't grow up like that. I bet Scott didn't either.
And we're not asking parents to do that because parents have their children's best interests at heart. They've lived longer, they've experienced life, and their ultimate goal is to see their children live the best life they possibly can. At the same time, I don't know that parents are allowing students to voice as much as they may need to. I'm certainly not here trying to pass out a prescription on how to parent. What I am saying is that I think every parent wants his or her child to grow up and thrive and be able to participate fully in a democratic environment. It's very difficult to use critical thinking skills and voice when in fact you've only been nurtured to be silent. So our parents could be a huge help to us by thinking about what it means to nurture a democratic environment at home, helping students to make wise choices, giving them the skills to do that. Because in doing that, they can use those skills to make wise choices when they're not around their parents. Those are skills that can continue to be strengthened as they go through the K through 12 system, graduate from college, and go on, or not graduate from college, do whatever it is that they've decided is best for them as a career. They'll have those skills. They'll know what it means to make wise choices and what are the consequences of the choices that I make.
One of the things or keywords I heard you say was this whole notion of critical thinking skills for students. And I know as we think about 21st century skills, that's kind of one of the phrases that we hear a lot is developing critical thinkers, critical learners, and I'm sure that's something that Scott's probably familiar with. Tell me, and I'm going to ask this of Scott, what might that look like in a classroom? And then how might parents then take some of those skills and put them into place at home? There may be some parents who are already doing that. But sometimes we use this lingo, and as a parent, we're thinking, what are they talking about? You know, I just know my mom would say, you need to do what I tell you to do. I don't care how critical your thinking may be. But when we're thinking of a classroom and we're engaging students and we want them to be critical thinkers, which I think is a part of this whole lessening bullying piece that you're talking about, Linda, what might that look like in a classroom?
In the bullying, for instance, what I have done in my classroom in the past, and I'll do again this year, is role playing with my kids. Because often I know when I was growing up, I was thinking of, oh, that's the bully, and that kid there is the bullied. I never really thought of the bystander because I stood by and watched it oftentimes in junior high and high school, as did many of my friends, and it was rare that you'd see somebody stand up and say, hey, that's not right, you can't do that. But through role playing in my class and having a bully, the bullied, and the bystanders there, we would role play that so when they actually are in that situation, they may stand up and speak for themselves or for their friends or for somebody even that's unknown to prevent that from happening again. And I think the role playing made the students stop and think, what do I need to do? Because the more they're going to practice that and act it out when it's not really happening, the better chance they have of actually acting it out because I know my daughter, I'll lay out scenarios for her at home, and I'll say, honey, how would you deal with this? And she'll tell me how she would deal with it, and then we talk about it.
Right.
Because sometimes I'm afraid so many parents, children, they think, oh, I know them and I know everything's okay. You don't always know. Sometimes there are deep down thoughts where your kids don't feel like they have a voice. They feel like they've been shut down completely.
Right.
And that can be devastating.
And I keep going back to this, and we don't even think about that as bullying. But I think when you talk about doing this role playing with your students, are parents even at home asking their children, so what are your thoughts about this situation? How would you respond and react? It moves them even beyond that. So as they move into the real world, and maybe they're in question of something that may be right, wrong, or indifferent, whatever the case may be, they feel like they have a voice to ask that question. That's what that critical thinking is all about. So when we develop those critical thinkers, we lessen that bullying. And then by knowing who our students are, as I've heard you both say, and Scott, you really gave us an example, is that whole notion of that cultural competence. When you know your student, you're better able to help them become that critical thinker that they need to be. So then it lessens that bullying, both on the teacher's part, on the student's part, and then as parents play into that, even on that parent's part. And I think what you gave was a great example. I just like this discussion because I've always thought of this whole notion as bullying as that playground piece that you talked about. There's the bully, or that person who grows up to be the bully, and we're really talking about a whole nother concept of bullying and what that looks like in the classroom, in the school system, at home. But go ahead, Scott.
And as well, I've even been the bully myself, and I'll treat a student, maybe it's just my tone that I'm doing, like, that is not how you do that, and I would have the students say, it's okay to come a teacher say, I don't appreciate you talking to me like that way, or in that tone. And I said, if they don't like you telling that, because you have that right, if they're making you feel bad, you have the absolute right to say, please do not talk to me that way. And if they can't deal with that, that's when you need to go to somebody else or an administrator and talk about it, or your parents, and feel free to talk to them about that. But I think that's important because some teachers, they don't even know they're doing it hardly. I mean, maybe it's the way they were just raised, maybe it's just how they've seen their parents do it. But they need to really, it's that whole research part, because it really made me sit back and
kind of
question
examine
my
yourself,
parenting, but really look at myself and be like, okay, just to, like you said, become a more critical thinker.
So Scott, in your classroom, as you kind of stepped back, as you were going through this project and the study, and you began to do some self-examination as a classroom teacher, thinking, okay, how might I possibly be bullying my students? And some of it you said might have been through voice or through action. Had you ever really thought about that before going through this project?
Yeah, because I'd had experience with, like standing above the kids, so I knew my actions could really do it. And
Okay.
so I had thought about it before, however, not to the point of where I was actually examining my own everything I was doing, though.
So some confirmation and then some self-assessment. I think too, as I went through the project, I had a lot of self-reflection and a lot of confirmation and a lot of thoughts on where I may have and or did bully as a parent, and some guilt too. But I think this project really helped me personally reflect on, so where am I as we talk about being the bully or the bullied or the bystander, and where does that still occur in my life as I'm reflecting, and where might I need to make some changes? What are some things you were able to take back to your school for other teachers, maybe that you modeled, or that you maybe verbally were able to share with them from your learning from this project?
There's so many resources out there for cultural competence, and I know USD 259, I mean, that's a big thing in our school, is getting to know our students, knowing exactly where they're coming from, because I came from a middle class family, but I grew up, and towards the end of my school, high school, we were nearly the minorities in our school. And I saw how the minorities, sometimes they were just treated a little bit indifferent because maybe they didn't speak English that well, they looked a little different, but there was just a little indifference there that everybody saw. And it's almost like there was dread that they were going to soon take over and we were going to be the minorities. And I mean, you heard people all over town talking about it. So I stopped and thought, you know, that's not the way I want to think, like, oh, this is a dread. This is just life, you know, there's constant change everywhere. And I need to be ready for that and accept it and embrace it and do the best I can with it.
So, and I'll ask you that question again as you think about your learning, what you learned through the project. What were you able to take back maybe to teachers at your building and share with them?
So many teachers need to stop and really get to know those children more, just not on the surface, just get to know the kids, talk to them. That's some of the best teachings I think I have is the kids want to come in during recess and talk. They want to come in during all my breaks and talk. And I mean, sometimes I have to push them away a little bit. But when I get to know those kids really good and they trust me, and I know I never used to use the word love in my class. I was like, that's voodoo. I shouldn't ever say that word to them. But when they feel like I love them and they love me, it built such a great rapport with my students. And I think that was just a blessing for both parties.
I think you hit home. I think you said it best, is getting to know our students. And it's beyond the surface, as we said earlier. Yes, I know your first, your last name, but do I really,
as an individual.
Yes, do I really know my students? And I know for some teachers, particularly as we see class size increase, you're thinking, how am I going to get to know 29 students? Or if you're at the secondary level and you've got kids coming and going, how am I going to get to know 150 students? But students walk in and they want you.
And I think
to know
so
them.
many teachers concentrate, maybe you have a child in that class who has a lot of negative behaviors. You cannot just focus on that negative. You should be giving that kid 7 positives to every.
Right.
That's my ratio I'd like to use, is 7 positives to every negative you give them. I've really concentrated on that since this project's taken off, because if somebody's just negative to me, I may have to be perfectly nice to that kid, but if it's just Billy Stopper, constantly getting in trouble, that's a form of bullying, because it's just doom, doom. And that kid may not be able to help it from the environment they're from. And so I've really been able to reflect on myself and think about that.
I think that the work with MTSS that's pushing us to individualize our instruction for students, when we talk about the academic and the behavior side, to individualize how we're responding and reacting to students who their behaviors are all going to be different. So how are we responding and reacting to that through our CHAMPS, our Safe and Civil Schools project, that it's moving us in that direction, but we still have to continue to have the conversations, as you're saying. Do I really know my students? How am I knowing, how am I getting to know my students? Yeah.
Because I try my best, and sometimes I find out I did not know that, you know? Or
yeah. And then thinking, like you said, at the end of the school year, wow, when I look back over my class roster, I really didn't get to know all of my students. How do I do better next year? And I'm just continually amazed that probably if we were to ask you about the bullying going on in your classroom or the office referrals, I'm going to make a huge assumption here, but I'm going to think it's probably really less than those who aren't consciously.
It's extremely less.
I was going to say, than those who are just aren't cognizant of all of that. And so I wanted to thank Linda, first of all, for approaching Wichita Public Schools and giving myself and 6 other teachers that opportunity to participate in a project that really made us to reflect and look at bullying with a different lens. And not only look at bullying with a different lens, but put on that lens of cultural competence, or as we have studied and study in our district, cultural proficiency. And what are we doing to perpetuate bullying systemically, not just with our kids on the playground, but even with us as adults within the system, from coworker to coworker, from teacher to student, which was a big shock to me. But to really step back and look at what does that look like for me, and how am I contributing to that perpetuation of bullying in a sense that I've never had before. I don't know if you two have any more you want to add.
The essence of this work for me was to look at a school system, not start with Renee pushing Scott down on the playground. Yes, give attention to that, but to take the lens of social justice, educator Paulo Freire, and say, let's start with the structural components of the system and how they sort and rank students, and how that kind of ideology informs our teachers and therefore guides their behavior, and how it plays out in the classroom, and what does it teach our children about an appropriate use of power. And ultimately, if we can give students voice in the classroom, our teachers can learn more about our students, and our students can become better able to think critically about systems that are inequitable. You really cannot address what you don't admit. And if we have systems that are inequitable and unfair, then we need to be teaching our students through transformative teaching and learning projects how to change that. Not only that, I'm thinking about one other thing, and that is that critical thinking means that students will ask themselves, why do I need to bully Scott or Kim to feel better about me? The bullied could ask, why would I allow myself to be bullied and stay silent about it? This is an unjust behavior. Those who are watching can say, I should not be a bystander to this kind of injustice and not speak out. And very finally, Kim, very finally, Scott said it well. At the end of the day, no matter how many books we read, how many articles we write, how many presentations we make, we are all on the journey to become better people, because we all have to admit that we have bullying tendencies. And I've not met anybody, whether it be K through 12 teacher, whether it be administrator, or whether it be university professor, I have yet to meet anyone that shouldn't be on this journey with us to become more authentic, to self-examine, and to ensure that we are reinventing ourselves so that we don't perpetuate hierarchies and systems of bullying, but that we work to intervene on them and even transform them.
And I really love what you just said, because what it says is we're all responsible. We're all responsible to help to shape, develop the structure, the culture of a system, and in this case we're talking about K-12 education. And so as we close today, I think about number one, just that whole word and that concept of bullying, and I look at it through a different lens, not the lens that I've always looked at it, and not that that goes away, because bullying on the playground definitely happens.
You bet.
But when you said that we all have to step back and ask ourselves, how are we perpetuating? And at what point am I a bully? I think that speaks volumes to those of us sitting here today, our parents, our educators who are watching, to say, how might I be perpetuating bullying, whether it's in my home, whether it's in my classroom, and how am I giving my students and my children voice to become those critical thinkers that we know that they are. Give them voice to be able to say, I loved when Scott said, what student's going to come to their teacher and say, you know, Mr. Torline, you've really made me feel uncomfortable today. And so how are we modeling that behavior? How are we encouraging that of our students? And so taking on that responsibility, and for me, walking away even today, even after a year after the study, saying, what am I doing, one, to perpetuate bullying as I see it broader now, and then what am I doing to begin to change the systemic sense of bullying from an educator perspective, from a personal perspective, excuse me, from an educator perspective, from a personal perspective, so that we begin to see systems change and we begin to develop critical thinkers throughout society. So Scott, thank you so much. Your 5 other colleagues, they owe you big time. and Linda, thank you. Thank you for the experience from me to be able to participate in this project. And I'm going to speak on behalf of the other 5 who aren't here. But it has really been a growth opportunity for me to learn and to see things through another lens, and to make that connection in what we're doing in our district through the work of cultural proficiency, through MTSS, and to see a teacher such as Scott, who's you see his mind just clicking as he thinks about what he's doing in the classroom with the work in the system and the new learning. So thank you for sharing your research, your knowledge with Wichita Public Schools. And thank you, Scott, for being here. And parents and I'm going to say educators, this opportunity to learn with teachers this past year through lessening bullying, through cultural competence, transformative learning and teaching, has been certainly a growth for me, and I didn't want an opportunity to go by without sharing our learning with our parents and our educators today. So thank you, and thank you so much for tuning in to Parent Talk.